people's homes. And it was almost impossible to get them all together to agree on a settlement to redo the mortgage because they were all split all over the country and each wanted to demand a big chunk of the benefits associated with that resettlement. Another example is the FCC auctioned off the telecommunications spectrum during the 1990s and is now trying to reassemble chunks of it in order to put in WiMAX, which will blanket the country in Wi-Fi. So in order to reassemble the spectrum, the FCC needs to purchase back big contiguous blocks of spectrum. And that requires diffuse harms to all the people who currently own that spectrum, usually television stations. So yeah, Edward.
So like I was like kind of reading about that.
Yeah.
Before they were trying to buy it back and they were auctioning it, and I remember reading that it was like very profitable.
Yeah.
To like auction off the spectrum. Like, so is the government going to be spending like more money? Like, how much money is it spending relative to like how much they gain from their solar?
Well, so I think the government is going to have to, in the cases where they're going to end up spending a lot of money, use some coercion. So I don't think they're going to end up spending that much money in the end. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
So is that why, because for me it seems like if the government was just buying back the spectrum, then the people that were selling it back to them would be getting like a fair market price for it, so I don't understand why they do that. So.
Well, the problem is that every individual person, I mean, if I have to get together all 10 of these people to agree to sell their stuff back, then each one is going to say, oh, well, why don't you just give me a bit extra? And the other one will say, why don't you just give me a bit extra? And because if you don't get my part, the whole thing won't go through, right? And so each of them is going to hold out for a bunch of it.
Okay, so is that how it works then? They're all necessary for the spectrum?
Yeah, that's the point. That's the problem, is that they're all perfectly complementary, right? So they're all going to demand a higher price, right? Patent pool assembly suffers from this problem as well, right? So to get rid of the multi-marginalization problem that we were talking about, one thing you might do is take a bunch of patent holders and merge them all together. But when you try to do that, each one says, oh, but why don't you pay me a lot for my company? Why don't you pay me a lot for my company? Otherwise, I'll go outside and I'll demand a lot for my patent, right? And that can ruin that process as well. Polluting projects are another issue of this, right? If you're going to build a factory and that's going to pollute a whole area, if the people all have the right to say, no, I don't want this pollution coming in, that's going to be really, really hard to institute. So that's another public bad. So these are not really any different from, yeah, go ahead.
Does rivalry and excludability also apply to public bads like Republicans?
Yeah, exactly. So non-rivalry is the fact that it applies sort of indiscriminately across a broad range of people. Non-excludability doesn't apply as much because it's sort of like, I guess someone could pay to opt out of the bad, potentially, and we don't have that here. But the key idea in a public bad is it just sort of applies indiscriminately across a broad group of people, and you can't avoid it applying to all those people and make it apply to less of them.
Does the marginal harm to the marginal person differ as you increase the range, or is it the same for everyone?
No, I mean, I think that the idea is that there's some fixed harm that accrues to everyone that's unavoidable as a result of whatever is done. So, again, the collective action problem applies, but now it's what's called the holdout problem, which is that everyone is going to demand these bigger payments in order to accept, the public bad occurring. And that's going to make it impossible to impose that, right? Okay, so these problems are pretty pervasive, and let's think about how we might be able to solve them. So I'm going to try to argue that we're usually going to need coercion, but before that I want to consider some potential private solutions, including what Ben just was saying earlier, which is that some people just contribute to charity, even though it doesn't seem to be particularly in their interest to do it. People often do public-spirited things. Giving to charity, voting, doesn't seem to really make sense for any individual person because the chance that you actually make a difference is very small. Volunteering for military service is another example. And so people are choosing to do these things. They're not acting out of sort of classic self-interest. And we sort of looked at this in problem set 3. They're sort of motivated in these cases by prestige, so like looking good to other people, or maybe looking good to future mates, right? They think if you give to charity, you're a good person and you'll be nice to them as well as nice to charity. It may just make you feel good about yourself. This is called the warm glow hypothesis, regardless of the effect that it has. It might be signaling, so it might help you with your career to show that you're a good person. So a classic example of this is people who are applying to medical school often go and like work in hospitals for the summer because the medical school applications always look favorably on that type of thing, right? Yeah, David.
Do some economists consider this part of the self-interested model, just because you can assign a utility to these activities?
Yeah, everything. All this stuff is. I mean, everything in this class is just transforming things into some form of self-interest, right? Yeah, Ben.
But I mean, the government does, like, in some sense, subsidize all this. Besides voting, like charity, like you get tax break. Volunteer in the military, you get like the GI.
Still, it's not enough to make people want to do them. And I mean, no matter how much it's subsidized, it's not subsidized enough to make up for it. Like charitable contributions, yeah, maybe I get 30% discount on that, but I could still, I'm still the social value is much more than 10/7 of the. So there's still the public goods problem. So. There's no question that all these things help and that they're important social tools. But first of all, they require a very slow development of culture in order to reward people for doing these types of things, right? In order for something to become prestigious, that's something that takes 50, 100, maybe 1,000 years to develop a good social reward for this. So for many of the biggest social problems that we face, the idea that they're going to be solved using this type of an approach seems implausible. Like in eminent domain, it seems unlikely that you're going to develop a deep-seated cultural value that I should be willing to sacrifice my property in order to, do the thing that's in the social interest. Maybe over hundreds of years you could develop that, but it seems unlikely that it's going to work in any short period of time. And I think the Soviet Union found that trying to instill a cultural value of sacrifice in every area of economic life didn't work terribly well, right? So if goods or bads are local and it's easy for people to move, then people can just move to the place that provides the good the best. And this is called taboo competition. So local areas compete in the provision to try to attract people. This is important for a lot of local public services like street cleaning, schools, police, fire, etc. But it crucially depends on people being able to move, right? People have to be able to very cheaply move to the best area, and the value of the good has to not depend on what location it's provided in. So for example, if California does a really bad job providing public pools, moving to Minnesota in order to get better provision of public pools is not going to work very well because it's freezing cold in Minnesota most of the time. And so it doesn't really matter that they do a good job providing pools because no one's going to want to swim in them, right? This makes the problem with this is that once you can have a local area that you can keep people out of, say if they don't pay property taxes, and which only accrue to people who choose to move there, basically you've got something that's excludable and rival. Effectively, right? So there's only so many people that can live in a given area. There's so many people who can go to a given school. So while to some extent these might be public goods, in some sense they're really not. They're not really applying over a broad group of people that is sort of fixed, independent of the actions that people take. And so really taboo competition is just pointing out that in some cases something that might initially appear to be a public good is more of a private good. It's not really solving the public good problem. The most famous solution to the public good problem comes from two Swedish guys named Lindahl and Weyl. So, from now on in the lecture, I'm going to focus on the case where the public good that we're thinking of is just a binary thing. So, it's not like how much we're going to provide to charity, but just whether we're going to build something that everyone's going to benefit or be harmed by. And this is simpler, and everything that I'm going to say extends to the other case, but I'm just going to focus on this for now. So imagine that each citizen gets some value VI from us building the bridge or school or coming up with the idea, and that the cost of undertaking it is capital C, right? So then a simple solution is you could ask each individual to pay a share of the total cost, which is equal to their share of the total value, right? So if we let SI be VI over capital V, then we can ask each individual to pay SI of the total cost, right? Now, it would be efficient to create this thing if V was greater than C, right? The capital V was greater than C. And everyone will agree if you just ask them whether they're willing to give their share, as long as they know that the good won't be built if they don't make their contribution, right? Because if capital V is greater than capital C, then little vi will always be greater than little vi over v times c, right? So if we assign everyone their share, which is equal to their share of the total value, and then just ask them to voluntarily give the contribution and say that if everyone doesn't contribute, then we're just not going to build the thing, right? Then everyone will choose to contribute. So why not just say, if everyone agrees, we build the project and you pay your share, and if anyone disagrees, we refund everyone their money and we don't build the project, right? And this strategy would work exactly when it's efficient, because everyone is pivotal in the decision, right? Everyone, if they fail to make their full contribution, ruins the whole thing, and is therefore doesn't want to refuse to make their contribution, right? This is called Lindahl pricing or Lindahl equilibrium, and the procedure for putting it into place is called Witzelian unanimity. But there's a question of whether any procedure like this could really work in practice. Yeah, Ben?
Doesn't the magnitude of V greater than C really matter? Because, how much V is greater than C? Because, let's say, the last S, N, the last person doesn't want to pay for whatever reason.
Yeah?
So then it still might make sense for, all people, S to, N minus the last guy to pay, a little bit more, right? Because the benefit will be better. You want to look at the margins and see, well, if the one person doesn't pay, it still might make sense.
Well, so I agree that there could be potential problems in implementing this, but imagine you could really commit to this scheme, where you say, look, we're not going to put this into place no matter what, even if it would be efficient, unless everyone agrees to make their contributions. If that's truly what everyone believes is going to happen, then everyone's going to agree to give their contribution. You know what I mean? I'm not saying this is the best thing to do. I'm just saying it would work.
Because people also need to be able to self-realize the V for themselves, their own VI.
That's true. And also, to determine the shares, society needs to be able to figure that out, right? So we'll talk about that now. So in practice, I don't think that this would actually, Bill.
What if someone obtains no benefit from the thing, and maybe obtains benefit from people not having the thing, and they just decide to
Well, then their SI would be negative. If you truly knew the value, if they had negative value.
But so we know their individual value.
Well, yeah, so that's what's required for this thing, right? Each person has this value, and we can assign them a share of the total, which is equal to their individual value.
So everyone's not paying the same thing.
No, everyone has to pay their share of the total value.
I thought it was the whole thing.
No, we know everyone's value. We make them each pay their share of the total value of the cost. David.
It seems like people just lie about their
Well, David, that's you're up next. Yeah. So why do you think this wouldn't work?
Well, I guess for a couple of reasons. One is that it'd be pretty hard to estimate people's individual values accurately, and you'd have an incentive to mislead.
Yeah.
And then the other is that it would be a major problem if you were really, really close to getting the project actually completed, but one person was just not cooperating.
Yes. And so the second thing you said was that it might not be credible, and which was sort of what Ben was getting at too. It's if 99 people agree and they're all really enthusiastic, and then one person says no, it's not very credible that you're really just going to be nope, it's off, right? You're probably going to come up with the extra money. But if you do that, then everyone's going to have an incentive to be the one who lies. And yeah, David?
I was just say, couldn't you for